Many people came to Florida in the 1920s looking for work. One was Walter Pryor and his family. Coming from hard times in Ohio, they left on Thanksgiving Day, 1925, in a Model T Ford, and 5 days later stopped just north of the Anclote River in Tarpon Springs. One of Walter's sons, Harvey, tells the story of how boat building became his family's business.
My father was born in Columbus, Ohio, and he was the son of a hardware store owner. The store was doing quite well in Columbus, Ohio, but the owner of the property went to raise the rent, so my grandfather moved the store. It was a fatal move, and so in 1925, after they sold the store off, they moved to Florida, what they described as $500 worse than broke. It had not been a good sale. And so they moved into a tent camp in Tarpon Springs. A lot of people used to live in these tent camps when they first came to Florida. And Dad grew up there for a while, developed friendships among people, and then they moved to Clearwater in various areas before Dad went to college for a year and hadn't done real great. And Dean asked him, "What do you want to do in life?" And he said, "I'd like to work in a boatyard." So Dean said, "Why don't you?" So my father came back to Clearwater area and started working in Brumbies, what became Clearwater Bay Marina later on, and that started his life and career on the waterfront. My mother's side of the family is Old Florida. We're part of the Garrison clan, and I'm what's considered fifth generation Pinellas County native.
At the age of 18, Walter got his captain's license from the Coast Guard, and in the late 30s operated several charter boats out of Clearwater.
He was working at Brumbies, there where Clearwater Bay became the main yard later on, or was renamed. And first it started out that a couple of Coast Guardsmen had come over to do a boat inspection, and Dad asked him, "What do I have to do to get a captain's license?" They said, "Well, answer a few questions. What colored light is on the port side of the boat?" And he told them red. "And if you have 5 people on board the boat, how many life jackets do you need?" "Well, I'm there too, so you'll need 6. And a few questions that way, and they said, "Get a couple people to sign this real quick because we have to catch the bus back to Tampa." That got him his first captain's license. And while working at Brumbies, this gentleman that had a boat there, Mr. McFeely, ended up hiring him as a captain for a couple of seasons. Mr. McFeely was the richest man in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. This is back before the Palmers were known for golf or anything. They were just farmers. But Mr. McFeely would invite guests down because he was the refractory brick company owner. And so they dealt with a lot of people that were in the steel industry. And Dad would run his boat. They'd go to Key West, different places, as well as local. And Mr. McFeely introduced Dad with how to deal with the richer people in life, how to say thank you if someone gives you a gift, as opposed to try and respond with a gift. The rich people of that era, at least, did not want you to burden yourself with a gift. Just say thank you and be happy. Back around 1940, a friend of his had gone to Key West and was working in the shipyard down there. In Key West, they were working on the naval vessels. A lot of them, as they first came out of the shipyard, would come to Key West for their shakedown cruise, and then they would have various things they needed done. Dad first went down to be a carpenter and applied for a job as a carpenter, and they told him, "No, we really don't need any carpenters." And he was about to come back home. A friend told him, "Go back and apply as a shipwright." Nobody was quite sure what a shipwright did differently than anything else, but he did, and got hired on. They told him, "Yeah, we need some of those." So he worked for a while as a shipwright in Key West, and basically worked alongside the carpentry crew. but he found out real quick that the crews talked to each other. He built a corner cabinet in a pantry for one cook. Next day came in, and almost every other ship of that class had filed a request for a corner cabinet in that same corner on their ship. But this was an era that we were more or less preparing for war. We weren't in it yet, and they told him in the middle of 1941, we have a need for people in other shipyards. Would you consider a transfer? And he thought about it some, but eventually turned it down. It's estimated that if he had taken the transfer that they offered, he would have arrived in Pearl Harbor on December 1st of 1941. Back around 1948, he and his previous partner, different name for it, George Sonder, bought a piece of property north edge of Dunedin, South Ozona, sort of area that's hard to define geographically, and they split the land. And Dad moved to the site, started building a house there. That is where they raised the family. They already had 2 kids at that point, and a couple years later, after they moved there, I came along. But they built the house as they had money for it. They basically built a shell, moved in on the subfloor, didn't even have the final flooring in when they moved in, and as they had money, they would improve the house. Winter was coming along, they realized they needed a furnace, so they added the furnace. Later on in life, when I was already there and we got a little bit of money, they expanded, got themselves their own bedroom, so they no longer had to share with one of the kids or anything that way. And it was a good life for him in that he was with or close to his work, his boats. As time went along, he started adding on to the site. He built a few boat slips, and the first 6 or so, then he would add on 4 more or 6 more. Eventually, over the years, it got to be about 56 boat slips. Also realized that he could get into service work. Building boats was not a continuous thing. People would sometimes have orders in before you'd finish one. Other times you'd finish a boat and there just wasn't building work to be done at that moment. So we got into service work. We put in marine railways. At that point, there were not the big travel lifts, so we would pull a boat out of water on a fixed car that came up a railroad track. And we would do whatever service needed to be done, whether it was painting or other work, installing equipment. Dad was featured, at least his photo was, in a couple of articles. We had a author that wrote articles for various marine magazines that had us install several pieces of equipment on his boat so he could do articles about it.
It was quite a community of boat builders in the area. Each knew of the other's work and collaborated on projects at various times.
Dad knew Clarkie Mills for years. Nelson Weitzel, who went on to build, worked in our yard for a number of years. We were friends with other builders in the area. Dan Flaherty up in Tarpon Springs we knew. Wally Erickson up in Tarpon built a boat or 2. There were some people down county that we also knew. It was one of these things. If you were a boat builder, typically you knew the other folks. On the building side, back in the 50s and 60s, the majority of boats built in this country were built in shops employing 5 or fewer people. This is an article that Dad had read in one of the magazines and remembered that boat building was something that was done in the small shops. And it was the life that he loved. He loved working with the wood. We would use what they call flitches, just a slice of a log, and we would plane it and shape it. When you're building a boat, the bottom planks especially have a lot of curve to them. When they start out, they're just a flat board, but when you wrap them around the framework, they curve and bend. And so that we would work with this raw material to produce a product. And when we got done with it, he was very proud of what he produced. He was a man that loved a family, first off. He would show up at baseball games. There were 4 of us, all boys, that were in the family, and we played baseball. And so he would be out for the baseball games and things that way. So family would be first on the list for him. But he cared about his church, his community. It was not just him, but life and the people around him. He would go out and help you. If you broke down on the waterfront, he was happy to come out and help you. Back then, there was not a big Coast Guard presence in the area and things that way.
Walter Pryor was a self-made man who built his piece of paradise through hard work and a singular sense of purpose. In so doing, he contributed to the history of boat building and coastal living in Pinellas County. Thank you for watching.